Then comes the second wave in the 60s to the 80s. This was revolutionary. It challenged the entire patriarchal system, sexual morality, the slogan, "My belly belongs to me."
This period offered this moment of immense hope, which was followed by what many Catholic women felt was a profound betrayal. The Second Vatican Council from 62 to 65 offered a glimpse of change. It condemned gender discrimination in documents like Gaudium et Spes. Women got roles as lectors, as communion ministers.
But that momentum was stopped dead.
Stopped dead in 1968 by Pope Paul VI's encyclical Humanae Vitae.
Which renewed the ban on artificial contraception.
Yes. And that was the betrayal. It directly countered this growing desire for sexual autonomy and self-determination over their own bodies. It led to massive protests, a massive exodus of women from active parish life. The hierarchy basically said, you have dignity, but not authority over your own sexuality.
Securing the male hierarchy's control over moral law. By the third wave in the 90s, the focus shifts to diversity and nuance through this concept of intersectionality.
This is Kimberly Crenshaw's critical insight from 1989, recognizing that discrimination isn't a single track. Forms of oppression, gender, race, class, sexuality, they all overlap and reinforce each other. And the theological significance of this was huge.
How so?
It pushed Catholic feminist movements towards solidarity with LGBTQIA+ and racial justice causes. They realized that exclusion affects multiple marginalized groups at the same time.
And it's fascinating that on the world stage, the Church participated. They endorsed the equal dignity of women at the 1995 Beijing UN conference. But internally, the leadership drew this definitive, non-negotiable line on power.
That is the classic contradiction. In 1994, Pope John Paul II issued Ordinatio Sacratalis, declaring the definitive closure of the women's ordination debate. It was an explicit move to stop the third wave's momentum from structurally changing the priesthood.
The message was, we recognize your dignity externally, but we will not share power internally.
Precisely. Which brings us to the fourth wave, driven by digital connectivity, global activism, and a focus on inclusivity, starting around 2010.
Hashtag Catholic Me Too.
Exactly. Hashtag Catholic Me Too movements exposing clericalism and abuse, increasing pressure for trans and non-binary acceptance. Pope Francis has certainly tried to respond rhetorically. He repeatedly condemns clericalism and machismo among priests. He's called for a stronger female presence in administration. But he remains skeptical of demands for true equality. He once said that all feminism ultimately ends up as machismo in a skirt. And that just highlights the continuing deep-seated tension, recognizing dignity while refusing structural, sacramental equality.
So while the third wave gave the theory, the fourth wave provided the action. And this Maria 2.0 initiative is the prime example of a successful grassroots uprising that forced the German Bishops' Conference to actually listen.
This initiative, which started in Münster, Germany in 2019, was deliberately named to signal this transition from the traditional docile Maria 1.0 to a self-confident, demanding Maria 2.0. And the action they took was immensely symbolic and practical. A week-long church strike.
What did that strike actually entail on the ground?
The women refused to enter churches. They refused to perform any voluntary services.
So everything. Cleaning, reading, managing the accounts.
Everything. They held outdoor services instead, often symbolized by white sheets laid out in church squares, representing the purification and cleansing they demanded for the institution. The strike immediately made it clear just how dependent the entire parish structure is on women's unpaid labor.
The sources call women the backbone of many parishes. That absence must have been crippling.
It was. Without women, the entire operational life of many parishes, catechesis, charity work, liturgy prep, youth ministry, it would just instantly collapse. The protest exposed the lie that women are fully appreciated when in fact they're just serving a male-only power structure.
And their demands were radical for the institution.
Absolutely. Access for women to all church offices, abolition of compulsory celibacy, a reappraisal of abuse with female perspectives, and a new, humane sexual morality.
And by creating their own liturgical spaces outside the church walls, they were performing this act of civil disobedience, essentially claiming a part of the church's power for themselves, driven by what they call a critical love for the institution.
That phrase, critical love, is essential. They're not trying to destroy the church. They're trying to save it from its own self-inflicted structural wound. And the movement proved that the fight for equality is no longer confined to academic journals. It's become a matter of grassroots survival for the institution.
One of the most fascinating contradictions highlighted in the draft is this ambivalence from some iconic figures of mainstream secular feminism towards these core church battles. Alice Fortzer, a pioneer in German feminism, is cited as a symbol of this dilemma.
Schwarzer is an icon of resistance. I mean, she was at the forefront of the fight for sexual autonomy, the fight against the abortion ban, challenging state and church control over women's bodies. But the sources note she embodies a feminism that is socially radical, but paradoxically, ecclesiastically conservative in its demands.
Meaning she never publicly called for women's ordination or a female pope, even though those are the ultimate symbols of equality and power. Why stay silent on the ultimate power question?
Well, critics argue that by remaining silent on those symbolic issues of ordination and the papacy, feminism risked losing its focus at the absolute center of power. Schwarzer remained combative in what the sources call the bazaar of side issues, abortion, sexuality, social equality. But she left the patriarchal core, the ordained ministries, and the hierarchy completely untouched.
So she implicitly conceded the religious realm to the existing power structures.
That's the argument. And the draft also notes a striking contradiction in her position on gender identity, which seems to echo the church's own essentialist arguments.
That's the ultimate paradox.
It is. Schwarzer has shown significant skepticism toward the trans movement and the Self-Determination Act, which aims to simplify legal gender change. She publicly argued that even with medical interventions, which she controversially framed as genital mutilation, a person remains biologically female or male for life.
That sounds like a strictly binary biological essentialism, despite all the scientific evidence we just discussed on DSDs and intersex variations.
It is. By fixating on a binary biological reality and ignoring documented diversity, and by using this highly judgmental and charged language, critics argue she reproduces the very ecclesiastical essentialism she otherwise fights against in society. It's the same logic. Power defined by fixed biology.
Which creates a real feminist dilemma.
It does. By retreating from the symbolic fight for ordination, feminism risked failing to build the cathedral of equality, becoming distracted in the bazaar of side issues, and ultimately providing argumentative sabotage to the radical theologians fighting for fundamental structural change within the church.
This brings us directly to the debate over women's ordination. And the draft encyclical explicitly labels this issue the linchpin of equality.
If the church can't achieve equality here, it sends this undeniable signal that it's fundamentally committed to inequality in all matters of authority.
This issue just concentrates the entire conflict, power, symbolism, justice tradition into a single high-stakes battleground. And the official church position, codified decades ago, is increasingly seen by reformers as, well, doctrinally fragile and pastorally untenable. The definitive prohibition came in 1994 with Pope John Paul II's apostolic letter, Ordinatio Sacerdotalis. What exactly did that document claim?
It declared solemnly that the church had no authority whatsoever to confer priestly ordination on women, and it insisted this view was to be definitively affirmed. This has been treated as a final, quasi-dogmatic ruling. It's effectively made the exclusion of women from the entire higher leadership structure a matter of settled doctrine.
And its authority has been immense. It's frozen official discussion for decades. And the central theological justification for this is the concept known as iconic reasoning. Let's break down what that means and why it's so powerful for conservatives.
Iconic reasoning argues that the priest, when he's performing the sacraments, especially the Eucharist, must be male because he has to visually and physically represent Christ. He acts in persona Christi, in the person of Christ.
So it's very symbolic, very personalized.
Highly. It argues that Christ, the ultimate high priest, was biologically male, and so the priest must embody Christ as the bridegroom to the church, which is symbolized as the bride.
So if the priest were female, the entire sacramental drama, the visual iconic connection to the historical male Jesus, is broken.
That's precisely the argument. The physical male body is essential to the iconic representation of the risen Christ in the Eucharist. And the consequence of this is structural exclusion. Women are left with spiritual dignity from baptism, but zero power. They're barred from the strictly male hierarchy of pope, bishops, and priests.
A men's club.
An exclusive men's club, regardless of what the paper says about spiritual equality. And the sources ask bluntly whether this core pillar of the Vatican's position is now just rotten and no longer viable. Hashtag 3.2 biblical and theological rebuttals.
Reformed theologians argue that the church is inappropriately fixing God, who is spirit on the biological sex of a single historical figure. What are their strongest biblical and theological counterarguments?
Well, first, they challenge the historical mandate. The argument that Jesus called only 12 men is seen as a singular act, interpreted through the lens of salvation history. It represented the 12 tribes of Israel, a specific, symbolic, non-repeatable, foundational act.
So it doesn't constitute an eternal gender norm for ministry across all cultures and time.
No. And they also draw on New Testament evidence to prove that female apostolicity was a historical reality that the church later tried to suppress.
This is a crucial historical correction.
It is. We have concrete evidence. Phoebe is attested in Romans as a diakonos, a minister or deacon. More significantly, Junia in Romans 16.7 is explicitly called esteemed among the apostles.
But her name was often masculinized to Junius.
For centuries, yes. A clear attempt to deny female apostolic authority. Modern textual and historical research confirms her female identity and her apostolic rank. It proves female authority was present at the highest levels of the early church before patriarchy really took hold.
And how do they counter the fixation on external gender in the in persona Christi argument? That seems to be the highest theological hurdle.
They use the concept of the risen Christ. God is transcendent, pure spirit, beyond all human gender categories. The risen Christ, who is present in the Eucharist, is beyond biological sex, so focusing on the external physical male body it's reductionist.
The emphasis should be on inner conformity with Christ.
Exactly. On spiritual characteristics like devotion, service, pastoral love, intellectual capability, things that are entirely gender independent, they argue the spiritual character of the minister matters, not the body's packaging.
And beyond the high theology, the sheer volume of support from the faithful has to be persuasive.
Oh, the sensus fidelium, the sense of faith of the faithful, is a powerful pastoral argument for change. The survey data is overwhelming. You see broad support for women's ordination. 75% in Germany, around 64% in the US, over 80% in places like Brazil and France.
Oh.
The draft argues that the viability of the church in the 21st century depends entirely on whether the hierarchy can listen to and respond to this profound change. Ignoring it risks permanently alienating a massive segment of the church.
Since Rome has definitively closed the door on the priesthood, the sources focus heavily on these intermediate, cautious steps that Pope Francis has been taking, especially around the diaconate.
The ecumenical comparison is powerful here. I mean, other major churches, Anglican, Lutheran, many Protestant denominations ordain women without division. It counters the church's internal fear that this would destroy tradition.
And internally, Francis has made some small but significant moves.
Small but significant. He's opened the previously male-reserved ministries of lector and acolyte to women. And more critically, he established 2 commissions to research the historical role of deaconesses in the early church.
Why is the potential reintroduction of the female diaconate so critical? Is it just an administrative role?
Far from it. It is widely viewed as the crucial first step, the wedge that could break the entire symbolic wall of male exclusivity. Historical precedents exist for women holding this office, which was sacramental in nature.
So if it were reestablished, female deacons could preach, baptize.
Preach, baptize, witness marriages, lead non-Eucharistic services.
So once women are officially performing sacramental roles that are currently restricted to the ordained clergy, the theological argument for male exclusivity in the priesthood just starts to crumble.
Exactly. The positive experience of having women in ordained ministry preaching and baptizing would normalize the idea of female religious authority. The hope is that once the church sees that no spiritual harm comes from female ordained ministers, the discussion about the priesthood will inevitably follow.
It's the first battle that has to be won to reopen the war for the priesthood.
It is. It's often linked to the parallel discussion about relaxing the celibacy requirement. The diaconate is the key.